But then on the other hand, you see, when you study the relationship of categories to each other, and you see that every inside has to have an outside, then you begin to suspect that there's something in common between insides and outsides. They always go together. Now, what is it that they have in common? Well, then you see very soon that there is no word for that, because it's not a class. It's like a glass instead of a class. In other words, it is the transparent medium in which it all happens. In the same way as all sight, all shapes and colors are in the medium of optics, or all bodies are in the medium of space. So we come to something which doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. And yet it is fundamentally important. Now, this notion, you see, of there being something fundamentally important which makes no difference at all to anything is a very subtle idea that has to be absorbed by Western philosophy if it is to redeem itself from being totally boring. And I will illustrate it in this way. I want to illustrate it by the image of the usefulness of useless things. This goes by analogy, you see, with the tremendous importance of that which doesn't make any difference at all. Useless, see? Well, now, we often say that all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. In other words, if you don't spend any time wasting time doing useless things, you will not be healthy. And so in this country, where we have a very utilitarian aspect of things, we are above all practical people. We only allow people to be in a playful state if we are quite sure that it will improve them. And for this reason, we never really succeed in playing. We always justify it. You go to the concert because it is good for you. You know, there's wives who have a great idea about the opera and the concert, drag their husbands out, and who are totally bored by the whole thing, but they feel somehow or other that this is culture and is, you know. Now, so in the same way, it is very important, but you must not make it important, you see, to have, along with one's ordinary, regulated, everyday life, which is practical and conducive to survival and all that, you must have a certain amount of insanity in your life. That's the real reason for having Sunday. Every seventh day is a day off. And it's a day off from making sense. I have to make sense all the time, you see? I'm making sense to you now. But sometimes I would like this to go instead. Because I need to loosen up my intellect. I call it to randomize the intellect. Actually, before I ever give a lecture, instead of sitting down carefully and thinking out what I'm going to say, I randomize my intellect completely and let everything be forgotten and then start. Because this limbers you. It's just like a person who was going to do something like surgery could do this with his fingers first to feel that everything is working, you see. Well, this doesn't make any sense at all. This is just motion. But he's got himself limbered, you see, and he's ready then to do something very precise. So in the same way, a steel bridge has to be limber. It has to give and sway in the wind, otherwise it'd crack. The slightest earthquake or storm would knock it down. And so with people. People have to be limber to be sane. And therefore, every seventh day, you should go crazy. And at least once a day, in every 24 hours, there should be a crazy time for complete limbering up of the mind. Now, this kind of crazy time has been handled by human beings in very many different ways. Many, what we think today are religious rites, are actually crazy. They've acquired, you see, an air of solemnity because people forgot what they were really about. And parents said to the children, you ought to do this thing, it's good for you. And the children said, oh no, because the parents said you ought to do it, it's good for you. And so the children, over many generations, did these things because they felt it was good for them, and therefore got all the wrong spirit into it. And so for this reason, then, you go into a church, whether it is Buddhist or Christian, it doesn't matter what it is, and everybody's going like this, and looking as if this was desperately serious. See? This is a complete reversal. Now, one of the things that is coming into being now, today, is a new religious spirit, which is non-serious religion. One of the great exponents of this is a man called James Broughton, who is a local poet. And he has written the most fantastically amusing poems about religion. And the funny thing about his attitude is that it is respectful, serious all at once, but not. In other words, it is a kind of religious humor. I'll play some to you this afternoon. But he has this wonderful double take where he is really respecting religion. He's a very religious man. But he treats it in this light touch. I remember when I was a priest, I still have this attitude because it's been with me for many, many years. And we used to have a great, gorgeous service in the Episcopal Church in Northwestern, where, of course, because this thing is essentially joyous, we had candles and vestments and incense and the works, And I remember I had a special student who was called the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And he always carried the incense, see? And I remember one day we arrived at the altar. The service was beginning, the organ was going full blast, the choir was singing, and in this very solemn way we arrived at the altar and made the profound bow, which you make because you're in the presence of God. And we both started laughing. Because it was just delightful, you see? The thing was swinging. And you see, this really is the religious attitude. People who are not initiates think it's irreverent. You're not laughing at the deity and saying, oh, you old so-and-so. Well, you might be just a little bit, but the deity appreciates this, you see. What you're doing is you are limbering your mind. You're letting it all go. You see? Whammo! Because if you do that, then you've got something to work with later. But you mustn't do it with later in mind. You see? Then you're not doing it. And so this is the meaning that in a meditation exercise, in a religious exercise, take no thought for the morrow. You see? Because then, so long as you have got the notion in mind that this religious exercise is going to be useful and is going to come out practical, that is to say, help you to survive, you haven't let go. And therefore, just so long as you don't let go, your survival chances go down. Care killed the cat. On the other hand, watch and pray. You know, be on your guard. All those Christian hymns about, brethren, be sober, be vigilant. For your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour, whom resist steadfast in the faith. And so at the office of Compline, which is said at the end of the day, they have a hymn which asks God to protect one during the night, because you're going to go to sleep and you're going to be unconscious, and therefore anything might happen, you see. So please God, watch over us, that we don't have any naughty thoughts in the night and all that sort of thing, see? Because the devil may get you while you're asleep. So always, Christian, dost thou see them on the holy ground, how the powers of darkness prowl and prowl around. Christian, up and smite them, you know. So this attitude, you see, of on guard, always, like this. Eh? Well, that's all right, you know, you have to be. Life requires work and effort and all sorts of things like that. But you mustn't have it all the time. You've got to take time off from that. And the secret of that is, you see, once you really get into the secret of taking time off from being on guard, then you can eventually get into the deeper secret that being on guard, too, isn't serious. That, too, is play. Only the moment I've said that too is play, I seem to have abolished any distinction between play and seriousness. In which case, if I've done that, play doesn't mean anything anymore, from the logical point of view. But do you see that underneath all logical distinctions, where we say, well, it's either this or that, there is something in common between them. Now, I said that thing in common, let's go back, you're quite clear about this. I said I was going to explain the thing that lies in common and that is of no importance because it makes no difference, by the image of the useless, and how important the useless things in life are. So in this way, we would say then, basically the universe has no purpose, isn't serious, is just, you go out and look at the trees, and the trees are doing this and this and this and this, and having seeds and more trees coming along, and so on. That's what we're doing. And we would say, well, should I take some sort of attitude to this? Well, let's do it. But it isn't serious. It's what's called in Mahayana Buddhism, that aspect of things is called the Sambhoga Kaya. Sambogha, S-A-M-B-O-G-H-A. Wait a minute, B-H-O-G-A. Bhoga means bliss, enjoyment, delight. Sambhoga means complete delight. Sam means like the Latin summa and the English sun. Total delight body. So, in what is called the Trikaya, T-R-I-K-A-Y-A, the three bodies of Buddha, you have the Dharmakaya, which is the undifferentiated ground, which nobody can say anything about. Opposite, Nirmanakaya, which is everything you're looking at. And the joint between them is Sambhogakaya, that all this which seems to matter and to be differentiated and to make sense is jazz. It comes out of Dharmakaya for no reason whatsoever, just for kicks. It's all useless from the point of view of what we call being practical, because the practical point of view is simply confined to what cuts and distinctions you can make. So all practical people are precise people. They want to know precisely what and if and so on. How unpleasant to meet Mr. Eliot with his features of clerical cut, and his brow so grim, and his mouth so prim, and his conversation so nicely restricted to what precisely, and if, and perhaps, and but. So, yeah, that has its place. But there's something else too, underneath all those distinctions. And the balanced human being lives in both worlds. He makes sense, but also he makes nonsense. Just to bring everybody up to date, I was discussing this morning a logical problem which arises out of the philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism called mind only. That is to say, the philosophy that the whole universe is a construct of the mind. And I had previously explained that this was not to be understood in the Western sense of the word mind, where we have attributed to mind or to spirit a quality of a kind of gaseous, impalpable nature. The image of the mind used in Indian philosophy is the diamond. And the diamond is the hardest thing you can get and the most transparent. And so people's basic attitudes to life, you see, are conditioned by the images they use. So if you use as your image of mind something tenuous, gaseous, it means you really don't think it's very important, and therefore you can't possibly understand that it could be so effective. But if the basic image of mind that you use is a diamond, you have an entirely different view. So this school of thought, then, is saying fundamental reality is the mind, is you, is consciousness, and everything that you perceive exists in it and from it in just the same way that when you listen to the radio, all the sounds are on the diaphragm of the speaker, which is vibrating. Now, then I examined this morning this logical problem. You cannot specify anything about an element of some kind that is common to everything. You can't really think about space. What is the shape of space becomes a meaningless question, because we cannot stand outside space to see it contrasted with something else. Nevertheless, the idea of space is not meaningless, because we can see that the idea of space is basic, just as the mirror is basic to all the reflections in it, just as the eye and the optical nerves are basic to all visions, and the ear is basic to all sounds. But when your eye is working properly, you don't see your eye. You see everything else. When your mind is working properly, you are unaware of it. It's only if there is some disease of the eye that you start seeing spots in the sky, which are spots in your retina. Then the eye gets in the way of itself. You know the funny story about somebody sitting on the train next to another passenger and said, "Excuse me, but I hope the singing in my ear isn't annoying you." Because you see, when you get singing in your ear, you're hearing your ear. And so in the same way with clothes. I started out this morning talking about why I was wearing a kimono. And I said this is the most comfortable form of dress for a man. And the whole point of a kimono is that you don't feel you've got any clothes on. Now, some people don't know they are there unless they are tightly clasped by clothes. So they wear tight clothes because that presses in on you and says, "You're here." You see? Some people don't know they exist unless they're sitting on spikes. And that's why in Mexico and in India you will find people with a cult of suffering. The penitentes, the Christians, Indians, who flog themselves and wear crowns of thorns and hang themselves on crucifixes. They do this because that tells them you really do exist. Gives them a richer sense of being. So I'm only suggesting that, it's a free world, it's a free country, and you can have a sense of existence any way you like. But I personally prefer not to be fenced in and pressed and tightened up. I like the boundaries of my own skin. That's enough. So I put this on, not because I'm a Zen master, but because it's comfortable. So it's the point I was making is that although you cannot logically designate and describe a ground which is common to all kinds of figures and experiences, like space is the ground for all bodies in space. Nevertheless, if you rule it out, as with the logical positivists, and say all metaphysical discussions are meaningless, then you deprive life of a very, very important ingredient, which is the ingredient of the useless. The thing that is all important but makes no difference. The mirror is all important to there being any reflections there, but it makes no difference to the reflections. And if it's a good mirror, it sure mustn't make a difference to them. In other words, if a mirror has a flaw in the glass, then it will distort the reflection. But if it's a good mirror, it has no flaw in it. It doesn't distort. But the fact that it is there is basic to its function. So in the same way, by analogy, there has to be an element in all of our lives of total uselessness. That is to say, of 100% goofing off. If we don't have that as basic to all our goofing on, that is to say, our daily practical business, we're lost. We can do you see, what is practical is defined in terms of what promotes survival. Earning your living, getting enough to eat, providing for your children, etc., etc. That's practical, by definition. Fine. But there is no point in surviving, in bringing up children, in producing human beings and enabling them to go on living. There's no point whatsoever in doing that unless you can show these individuals who are surviving that survival and existence itself is play. In other words, is a kind of glorious nonsense. That's the whole essence of being alive at all. Well, now, I want to go on from this point to show you something that is usually completely incomprehensible to Westerners, which is the structure of a Buddhist scripture of this very school we're talking about, the Mahayana Yogacara aspect, and to try and understand a religious text that in its whole structure and idea is as totally different from the King James Bible as anything you could imagine. Now, we're, you see, conditioned to think, when we say the word scripture, you think of the King James Bible. And this is a very elegant piece of late Elizabethan English, which was brought down by an angel from heaven in the year 1611. It's a phenomenal piece of work because when you read the New Testament in Greek, it's in very bad Greek as compared with the Greek of Plato. It's a backwoods document, slangy, but it's very easy Greek. Plato's Greek is much more subtle and difficult to understand. But the English made, you see, an absolutely gorgeous translation. The people, the generation of the British that produced Marlowe and Shakespeare and Spencer produced this piece of literature. And so we compare every other scripture all over the world by comparison with the King James Bible, the authorized version, as the British call it. And so when you compare that with a Buddhist sutra, you say, oh, dear me, this isn't the same thing at all. And very few scriptures of other peoples stand up to the King James Bible. You can find, Bill will bring you in some chairs. Here you are, right behind you. I suppose the only things that really stand up are the Bhagavad Gita and Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching for real sheer beauty of form and expression. But the Buddhist scriptures are a completely different kind of literature, with a different purpose in mind. And there are volumes and volumes and volumes of them. They go on endlessly. The Mahayana canon is bigger than the Encyclopedia Britannica. It occupies shelves and shelves and shelves. And most of it is, from our standpoint, repetitious nonsense. And so they know this too, in a way. And so they have revolving bookcases with all the volumes of the scriptures in. And if you turn it round once, you acquire the same amount of merit as if you had read all the scriptures. So turn it round several times, and you keep moving up the merit like a prayer wheel. See? The prayers, they're not really prayers in our sense. They're not beseechings. They are mantrams. Say, Om Mani Padme Hum. This means Om. Om is sound. You start saying A in the back of your throat, and M is at the lips. So in saying the word Om, you cover the whole range of sound. Mani Padme means the jewel in the lotus. Hung means hooray. I mean, dig that man, see, hung. And so when you say this, you're not praying for something. You're simply uttering a sound which produces a certain kind of power, if you know how to use it. So when you revolve a prayer wheel, my friend Spiegelberg once asked a Tibetan monk, when you revolve a prayer wheel, do you have to think some meditations at the same time to make it work? He said, no, you don't. It works by itself.